Today I want to talk about doing a tree study in New York City, in particular Riverside Park in Manhattan. We go up there once in a while, visit grandkids and kids. Used to teach a workshop there in New York City. We would teach it in Central Park, on the west side near Washington Square Park. It's a great place to have a workshop. A lot of work. It'd be kind of exhausting, but a really great place to paint. So much subject matter. But even doing things like just a simple tree study, so many parks and great trees in New York. So again, like I talked about in a previous video, I'm using gouache. I find it just a little bit easier to carry around, set up. I don't have a giant easel to set up and get in everybody's way and worry about paint thinner. So I'm using gouache. And here's my scene. I'm going to be sitting on the ground and painting. And this is my setup. Talked about this again in another video. But I have a canvas board, a cheap canvas board I bought, I think, from Walmart. And I like this canvas board to hold everything because it's so light, but yet it's sturdy enough to hold everything up. And I clip a 140 or maybe it's 90-pound piece of watercolor paper there. And a watercolor palette. Get this at Jerry's, holds all the gouache. And I just clip that on, I clip the paper on. I drilled a large hole to slip this collapsible water holder in and just carry a bottle of water with me. And the brushes here, usually synthetic. These are rosemary flat brushes, ivory brushes. They do real well with the gouache, well with oil also. And then the gouache. And everything rolls up into this thing here, makes it real easy, slides into a backpack. And I can stand there and paint or sit. In this case, I'm sitting in the park, but if I'm on a street corner, I can stand, and really nobody knows what I'm doing. It looks like I might be reading a book or something, so you become kind of hidden away. But again, here's my subject matter. I'm going to focus on this tree. I still want to think about composition, even though it's a tree study. I still want to divide up the shapes evenly, have a good design of large, dark, and light shapes, instead of just thinking about details in a tree. So, although painting the tree is the main thing there. So, I'm going to start with a quick pencil drawing. I've already started on the darks of the tree, but pencil drawing, you can see here, I'm just separating background from the foreground flat plane. So the background vertical trees against the foreground flat plane. And I want to separate those two values. And then the darkest value will be the tree trunks, or in this case, the tree trunk. And here I'm trying to keep neutral colors because when we look at the photograph, the tree trunks, of course the photograph doesn't have good color in it as far as the tree trunks go, but they're just a neutral color. And I have to think about how cool do I want that neutral color. It's in shadow, so it's going to be cool. Of course, I'm not painting that tree trunk, I'm painting this one. But I want it cool enough that it stays in the shadow. But there's some sunlight hitting the ground right in here and bouncing up into the shadow as well. But I want to think about that reflected light later. I just want to block in a dark enough value that it's going to make that tree look upright and make it cool enough that it looks like it's in shadow. And I can always adjust. I can always add reflected light and adjust the values a little bit if I have to. So I'm not worried about being extremely accurate when I start the block in, because I know I have to adjust things. Where I put the dark value in of the tree trunk, and then I put the dark value in, again, of the background trees. I'm ignoring the lights, and I'm doing these darks in here. It's kind of flat, one value, kind of thin right now, a little too thin in areas. But as I block in this background, I realize the tree trunk is too light. I need more contrast between the dark tree trunk and the dark background. So I'm going to have to darken the tree trunk a little bit. But this gets me started. It simplifies everything. Now I can add 3 values to the background trees, add 3 values to the tree trunk, and 3 values to the flat plane. That's going to simplify it, but it's going to give me enough value change to make it interesting, to create some interest and a lot of form. I don't need much more than 3 values in those big areas to create form. Now first I want to show some depth in here. So this is kind of an ultramarine blue. I don't have a green on my palette. This is an ultramarine blue with cad yellow. Somewhat of a dark warm green. Not real warm, but warmer than this. This is ultramarine blue with just a little bit of ochre. So that's a lot bluer. So this recedes and goes back. And a few holes here of the darker blue-green. That gives some depth behind this, shadowed, a bit more yellow-green. And that's what I want to start creating, is depth there between those 2 values. So right now I have 2 values in the background color. And now I punched up that dark even more, making it recede, because I know I have to go darker here. So I'm going to go darker here. And now there's more contrast between the shadow distant, or the distant shadowed green in the background, and kind of the middle ground and foreground shadowed green, creating some depth there. Adding a few sky holes to break up the shape a little bit. Now I'm adding the light, and you can see how thick that is. I'm going from shadow to sunlight, so even with gouache, I want to build up that thickness so that it has impact. It looks sunlit. I can get this same value right here, same color, but if it's not thick enough, it's not going to have the same impact. It's not going to come forward like it's being hit by the sunlight, stand out more. It'll just kind of sink away. So build up those lights thicker, even if it's slowly building them up. And adding the lights down here, adding some of the shadow in the foreground. Color here is a little bit different, and the value is a little bit different than the shadow up here, because they're 2 different planes. So this has a bit more yellow ochre in it. This doesn't. It has yellow ochre in it, but not as much. And then, of course, the light green in the background, yellow-green, has a lot of yellow in it. But as far as the shadows go, these shadows are cooler compared to that shadow. Now, they're all cool in the shadow. This one's just a bit warmer, or not as cool as these. And it shows a little bit of variation, a little difference. With greens, it's so easy to get all the greens to look the same. So I'm trying to suggest a little temperature change down here, making it a bit warmer, a little cooler back there, and it gives me a different green, a different variation, so it doesn't all look the same. Brushstroke wise, I kind of follow the form. My brush strokes are going like this down this slanted hill. They're kind of horizontal on the flat plane here. And here they're just a jumbled mess of kind of squiggling the brush strokes around. Again, trying to show some variation in brush strokes so they don't all look the same as well. Now I'm adding the lights to all the flat plane, these flat planes in the middle ground, foreground, and adding the lights in the trees. As you can see, my tree trunk is still too dark. It's a little better value right there. Testing some out to see how dark to make it. And going a bit darker on the shadow down here. I want more contrast between the shadow and the light. And after getting everything filled in, that's basically what I'm doing. When all the big shapes are filled in, haven't done much detail yet, a little bit of smaller brush strokes in the foliage. But I'm just spending time adjusting the values of the big shapes. If I get too many details in all these big shapes, it's hard to adjust the value. But if I can keep, like the flat plane area down here, if I can keep that simple, just a light value, dark value, it's going to be easier to make adjustments of the value. Or color, if I want to change the color a little bit. But if I get too many details in there, I can't make any changes. So I've decided on the values of this light, these darks, and this lighter dark. That's the value in color. So I've broken it up more. Smaller brush strokes, smaller lights, some smaller darks, more detail. Some in the foreground, the dappled light on the grass and on the sidewalk here. And here, just kind of breaking things up more, I've adjusted the value on the tree trunk. Now I've got 3 values. I got the darkest. This is kind of what I had, way too light. So the overall value is more this value. I started with, this is my overall value. Once I got it the right value, it was too light for a while. Then I added some lighter reflected light. These areas in here, just a bit lighter, and then some dark accents. I still have more dark accents to go, but those are my 3 values. 1, 2, 3 in the shadow. And I've got a couple of values of bright sunlight on the tree trunk as well. So actually 4 values on the tree trunk, including the sunlight. And that gives it some depth to it. It makes it look rounded when I can get those 3 values in there. With just 1 value, it's going to look flat. I don't want that. So the reflected light hitting in here and bouncing up into here. I could add more reflected light in there. I think would work pretty well. I started to add a few trunks there. I didn't like the way it looked. I was going to add some smaller trunks that I saw back in here to kind of balance the composition, but I thought it made it too busy, so I didn't go forward with those. And I have to really think in terms of value relationships of the grass, the path, and the sidewalk. In the light area and in the shadow, dark grass, dark sidewalk, or path, dark grass, and dark sidewalk over here. Sidewalk's a little different than the dirt path. So I've got a little bit of color and value change in there. And then lastly, this is what I end up with, some more dark accents on the tree trunk, a few details of branches. But I wanted to work out the tree, you know, just the drawing with some color and value with the gouache. And some dry brush in there to suggest the texture of the tree. And those 3 values give this tree trunk some depth, some roundness. Not so much on the tree branch. It's fairly flat because I just have 1 value. Now where I have the dark accent on either side, that gives it a bit more depth. Makes the tree branch roll a little bit more. And just practicing getting those value relationships between the bright sunlight here. Sunlight areas are real simple because they're smaller, and the more complicated value changes within the tree trunk. And also just a variation of greens and values in the background. But trying to keep the background simple so the tree stands out. So I've got a lot of small brush strokes in the background foliage, but I just have 3 values. You got 1, 2, 3. And where they blend together, they might create an extra value or 2, but those are the 3 values I planned out in there. So anyway, that's my tree study, a little 6x8. Very helpful. Really like doing stuff like that. It's different from the finished paintings we always feel like we have to do. So doing tree studies where there's no pressure is always a lot of help. So if that was helpful, go ahead and like it. Please subscribe. And if you want to see more about painting outside in New York with gouache, watch this next video of simplifying a busy cityscape.